February 1968. 14,000 feet above the North Atlantic, 400 miles east of Newfoundland. It is 3 in the morning, and the world below is black. No ships, no lights, only the long swells of the winter ocean, rolling in the darkness like something breathing. Inside the aircraft, 15 men are 10 hours into their patrol. The 4 Wright turbo compound engines have been rumbling for so long the sound has become part of the aircraft itself. It is simply the air they live in. Coffee has gone cold in metal cups. The navigator marks another position on his chart. Down the fuselage, past the galley and the bunks, a young sensor operator sits hunched over his console, headphones pressed tight, listening to the ocean. He has been listening for hours. Whale song, rain on the surface, the distant churn of a fishing trawler, long since faded. Then, just after 0300, something else, a rhythm, faint, mechanical, man-made. He closes his eyes and counts the beats. His pencil stops moving. Somewhere beneath that black water, hundreds of feet down where no light has ever reached, steel propellers are turning, and they do not belong to any friend. He keys his intercom, and his voice is steady in the way voices are only when a man is trained for exactly this moment. Contact. The aircraft banks into the darkness. The hunt is beginning. But to understand why these 15 Canadians were among the few Western crews positioned to hear that sound that night, you have to go back a decade, to a country that had just been told its greatest dreams were too expensive to keep. February 1959. 9 years before that contact in the dark, Canada was a different country. By the end of the Second World War, Canada possessed the 4th largest air force in the world. Its factories had produced thousands of military aircraft, including Lancaster bombers and Hurricane fighters. Its engineers were designing aircraft that attracted considerable interest from Britain and the United States. In Moulton, Ontario, a delta-winged interceptor sat gleaming on the tarmac, faster than almost anything flying, designed and assembled in Canada by thousands of Canadian workers. And then, on a single Friday in February, it was gone, cancelled, the program erased, the jigs ordered destroyed, and more than 14,000 skilled workers sent home before the weekend. The country never fully talked about what that Friday did to it, but something changed. A quiet doubt settled in, the kind that asks whether a nation of Canada's size had any business building world-class machines at all. Except the doubt was wrong, and the proof was already flying, because 2 years earlier, in March of 1957, on a runway in Saint-Laurent on the island of Montreal, another Canadian aircraft had lifted into the sky for the first time. It carried no headlines, no ceremony matched the Arrow's rollout. It was not sleek, not supersonic, not beautiful. It was enormous, slab-sided and loud, with 4 piston engines that shook the ground when they ran up together. It received the name Argus, after the 100-eyed giant of Greek mythology. The aircraft attracted far less public attention than the Arrow would, yet inside that unlovely airframe, Canadair's engineers had created an aircraft that would quietly redefine Canada's role in the Cold War. While the country mourned the aircraft it lost, it had already built the one that would guard it for more than 2 decades. This is the story of how they did it, one rivet at a time, in a factory whose contribution was often overshadowed by more famous Canadian aviation projects. Saint-Laurent, Quebec. The mid-1950s, several thousand workers streamed through its gates every morning. Machinists and riveters and draftsmen, French and English side by side, many of them veterans who had spent the war building or flying the very aircraft they now saw hanging in memory. This was where the new machine would be born. The starting point came from Britain, the Bristol Britannia, an elegant long-range airliner. But what Canada needed was not an airliner, and what happened next was not a modification. It was a transformation. Canadair's engineers retained the basic wing and tail structure, while redesigning almost every other major element. The pressurized fuselage was gone entirely, replaced by a new one designed for a different world, a world of flying 200 feet above freezing waves for hours on end, where pressurization only added unnecessary weight. The graceful turboprops were removed, and in their place went 4 massive Wright turbo-compound piston engines, optimized for the long, low-altitude patrols that defined anti-submarine warfare. Nothing this large had ever been purpose-built in Canada as a maritime patrol aircraft. When the first airframe rose in the assembly hall, workers walked the floor beneath it just to feel how big it was. And in Ottawa and Washington, allies were watching with polite skepticism. Most of Canada's allies already relied on proven maritime patrol aircraft, making Canada's ambitious program an unusual path. The idea that Canada, of all nations, would design and build its own maritime patrol aircraft, hoping it would rival the best in NATO service, struck many observers as ambition outrunning ability. The question hung over the program: could they actually deliver? The answer was being installed in the aircraft's belly. Because the airframe was only the body, the soul of the Argus was electronic, and much of it was Canadian too. Canadian Marconi supplied major elements of its electronic and communication systems. Into the fuselage went a powerful search radar, a magnetic anomaly detector trailing from the tail like a stinger, a powerful searchlight capable of illuminating the ocean for miles at night, and racks upon racks of sonobuoys, the floating ears the crew would sew across the ocean. 2 bomb bays waited between the wings, capable of carrying torpedoes, depth charges, and other mission stores. On the 28th of March, 1957, the prototype thundered down the runway at Cartierville and climbed into the Quebec sky. Flight testing confirmed the aircraft performed as its designers had intended. 33 would eventually be built, every one of them in Saint-Laurent, and when the first crews took delivery, history would show that this unglamorous Canadian giant would establish a formidable reputation in NATO anti-submarine operations. They would need every bit of it, because far to the east, in the shipyards of the Soviet Union, submarine production was expanding at an unprecedented pace. Greenwood, Nova Scotia, Summerside, Prince Edward Island, and on the far coast, Comox, British Columbia. From these 3 stations, beginning in 1958, the Argus fleet took up its watch. The squadrons flew under names that carried the weight of Bomber Command history: 404, 405, 415 on the Atlantic side, 407 in the Pacific. Their new territory was measured not in miles, but in oceans. The job existed because of geography. Most Soviet submarines deploying from the Northern Fleet into the Atlantic had to pass through waters monitored by NATO, and many of the most important Atlantic transit routes passed through waters Canada was responsible for helping to patrol. If war came, those submarines would carry it. First torpedoes against Atlantic shipping, and later nuclear missiles capable of striking North America. In peacetime they came anyway, probing, mapping, listening, testing how close they could get before anyone noticed. Someone had to watch those waters, and Canada became one of NATO's principal guardians of the western North Atlantic. So the patrols began, continuing day after day for more than 2 decades. A crew of about 15, including pilots, navigators, flight engineers, radio officers, and sensor specialists. They flew in rotation around the clock, in weather that grounded almost everything else, through Atlantic winters where ice built on the wings, and the sea below meant death in minutes. A standard patrol ran 15 hours, many ran 18. The men ate meals cooked in the galley, slept in shifts on bunks bolted to the fuselage, and listened, hour after hour, to the ocean. And the aircraft simply refused to reach its limit. In 1959, an Argus crew completed a remarkable 31-hour flight without refueling, demonstrating the aircraft's extraordinary endurance. During that remarkable flight, the sun set on them twice. At the time, few NATO maritime patrol aircraft could match that level of experience. During NATO anti-submarine exercises, Allied crews came to appreciate just how capable the Canadian Argus had become. By then, the Argus had become a trusted cornerstone of NATO's anti-submarine patrol effort. Soviet submarine crews operating in Canadian patrol areas learned to recognize the persistent presence of the Argus overhead, and to understand that in the Canadian sectors of the Atlantic, the skies above them were never quite empty. Which brings us back to a February night in 1968, 400 miles east of Newfoundland, where a young sensor operator has just heard propellers turning in the deep, and 15 men are about to show why the Argus earned such respect among those who operated beneath the North Atlantic. Contact. The word moves through the aircraft like a current. Cold coffee is set aside. Men who were half asleep are suddenly fully awake, sliding into stations, pulling on headsets. In the cockpit, the aircraft commander eases the great aircraft down through the darkness, from 14,000 feet toward the black water, until the altimeter reads 300 feet, and the sea is now close enough that the crew can sense its texture through the darkness. This is where the Argus was born to live. The tactical navigator begins directing the search while the aircraft commander continues flying the aircraft. On his plotting table, The ocean becomes a chessboard. The first sonobuoy that heard the contact gives him one bearing, a single line across the water. One line is not a position, so the aircraft begins to sow the sea with listening ears, buoy after buoy dropping from the fuselage, splashing down in a calculated pattern miles across, each one floating its hydrophone into the deep and radioing back what it hears. In the belly of the aircraft, the sensor operators work the returns, bearing from buoy 3, bearing from buoy 5. The lines cross. Now there is a position. Now there is a course and a speed. Hundreds of feet below, a Soviet captain is running quiet and deep, and he may not yet know that the ocean above him has grown ears. The Argus turns onto the predicted track and runs it, low and steady, and in the tail the magnetic anomaly detector strains for the faint distortion that thousands of tons of submerged steel drag through the Earth's magnetic field. The magnetic trace begins to deflect. Madman! 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 The call means the aircraft has just passed directly over the hull. A marker splashes into the sea. The position goes out by radio, flashed to Maritime Command and into the vast Atlantic tracking network of NATO. And then the Argus does the thing that defined the entire Cold War at sea. Nothing. No torpedo force. No depth charge arm. The bomb bays stay closed, because this is peacetime, and the weapon is knowledge itself. Instead, as the submarine maneuvers, the Argus continually updates the plot and maintains contact whenever conditions allow. The message is unmistakable. The submarine has been detected, and its movements are being closely monitored. Somewhere below, a Soviet submarine continues its patrol under close surveillance. Throughout its operational career, the Argus never fired its weapons in combat. That was the victory. But no watch lasts forever, and by the 1970s, time was hunting the hunter itself. Time caught the Argus slowly, and then all at once. Through the 1970s, the aircraft still flew its patrols, still found its contacts, still logged its brutal hours over the Atlantic and Pacific, but the ocean beneath it was changing. The new generations of Soviet submarines ran deeper, faster, and quieter than the boats of the 1950s, and the hunt was moving from human ears and paper plots to increasingly sophisticated computers that could process sonar data far more quickly than earlier systems. The Argus airframe, some now carrying more than 20,000 flying hours of salt air and low-level turbulence, were wearing out. One of Canada's greatest Cold War aircraft was becoming a veteran in a young man's war. Canada needed a replacement, and this time the answer did not come from Saint-Laurent. The new aircraft was the CP-140 Aurora, built around the proven Lockheed P-3 Orion airframe and equipped with a mission system tailored to Canadian requirements. It would go on to serve honorably for decades. Canadian companies built components, and Canadian crews made it their own, but the aircraft itself was designed elsewhere. The days when Canada transformed a foreign airframe into its own long-range maritime patrol aircraft were over, not because the skill had vanished, but because the country's defense priorities and procurement strategy had changed. On the 24th of July, 1981, the last operational Argus flight came to an end at Summerside. Crews and ground staff gathered to watch. After 23 years of maritime patrol operations and countless hours over the coldest oceans on Earth, the Argus retired without losing a single crew to enemy action. The engines shut down for the last time, and a particular sound went out of Canadian skies for good. The fleet was struck off strength. Several airframes were preserved for museums or training. The rest went, as warplanes do, to the scrappers' torches. Canadair continued building aircraft under successive owners before its legacy ultimately became part of Airbus Canada. It would be easy to end the story there, in a scrapyard, but the Argus has one more watch to keep. A few of them survived the torches. Several Argus aircraft survive today, including examples at the National Air Force Museum of Canada in Trenton and the Greenwood Military Aviation Museum. Visitors walk beneath the great wings and wonder what it was. Children ask if it was a bomber. It was not. It was something rarer. The men who flew it are in their 70s and 80s now. When they gather, they talk about the 18-hour days, the ice, the galley meal, the sound of 4 Wright engines that they can still hear when the room goes quiet. They served in a mission that never fired a shot in combat, because its greatest successes came through deterrence rather than combat. That is the strange arithmetic of deterrence. Success looks like nothing happening, For 23 years, the Cold War in the Canadian Atlantic never erupted into open conflict, thanks in part to constant vigilance, and that nothing was purchased night after night by 15 men at a time, flying low over black water, while the country they protected slept soundly behind them. And there is one more thing worth remembering. The aircraft that guarded Canada's oceans was far more than a simple adaptation of an existing airliner. It was extensively redesigned, assembled and refined by Canadian engineers and workers, at a moment when the country was being told it should no longer dream that big. The Argus was named for the giant with 100 eyes who never slept. For more than 2 decades, neither did Canada's watch. If you flew her, maintained her, built her in Saint Laurent, or grew up near a runway where those engines shook the windows, tell us below. The watch deserves to be remembered.